Welcome to Maturing the Kingdom. This week, Brother Noah Stines will be speaking to us on the Talit and Tekhelet, understanding the biblical prayer shawl, the blue thread, and their fulfillment in Christ. Prepare your spirit to receive as we dive in.
Good morning, everybody. I wanted to try something a little bit different this morning. Normally, I have a microphone in my hand, and we all know that I can't hold a microphone still for nothing. So this morning, we're going to try the headset. See if we can do a little bit different this morning. This morning, I want to be teaching about the prayer shawl, or the Talit, the significance of the Talit, the significance of the tzitzits, and all the significance of the Tekhelet, or the blue thread that is put in the Tekhelet. Braxton, you may have to help me with slides. Nope, here we go. Now, Braxton, you're going to have to help me with slides this morning. My slides are not working this morning again. And another thing I'm doing different this morning is I'm using notes, because I normally don't like using notes, but there's a lot of material here this morning. I want to try not to hold y'all too long. But the Talit is, in the Jewish community, is considered to be one of the most significant pieces of worship. That's when they go to morning prayer in the mornings, they have a blessing that they pray before they put the prayer shawl on, and I'll get to that. But that's their morning, I don't want to say ritual. They consider it a ritual, but it's more than just a ritual. It's something that God has commanded us to do. It's something that we'll get into. It's actually in the scriptures here, and it's actually a commandment that God has told the Jewish people to do with wearing the tzitzits. There's two different types of talits, or prayer shawls. There is what they have is called the Talit Gadol, which is the traditional prayer shawl. This is going to be the traditional Talit Gadol. It's what they call the full size, or the large prayer shawl. And then there is the Talit Gadol, which is something that the men of Israel wear underneath their clothes. That way they can have the tzitzits on all day long, and not just during the morning afternoon prayers. It's something that they have on all day long. It's something that goes over the shoulders, and it goes underneath the men's clothes. And it still has the tzitzits just like a regular prayer shawl does. It's a very important for the Jewish community that they see that they do that. The prayer shawl, what we're going to explore this morning is the origins of the Talit, the commandments to wear the fringes, the meaning and the history of the Tekhelet, or the blue thread. We're going to look at the symbolisms of the knots and the windings. I'm going to briefly touch on that, because there's a lot to do with the knots and the symbolisms of the windings, but I want to briefly touch on that for a informational, historical. Then we're looking at Jesus and the fringes on his garments and the significance of that, and then the prophetic significance of the Talit and applications for us today. So our first scripture is going to be in Numbers 15, verses 37 through 41. And it says, "Speak unto the children of Israel, and bid them that they make them fringes in the borders of their garments throughout their generations, and that they put upon the fringe of the borders a ribbon of blue. And it shall be unto you for a fringe, that ye may look upon it, and remember all the commandments of the Lord, and do them. I am the Lord your God." So this is something that was, if you'll look at a prayer shawl, with the Talit Katan, it's actually sewn in, and it's something they wear all the time. But it is On each corner, you have the tassel, the tzitzit, it's called tzitzit, and there is a specific pattern to each winding. There's 5 knots. Each knot is double knotted. Each strand, each tassel has 4. You have 3 white strands and a blue strand. So each strand has a total of 4. And then when you tie it, it ends up being a total of 8, because when you double them, it comes out to be a total of 8. Like I said, we'll get into that. The purpose of the fringes is to remember his commandments, to walk in his obedience, to live a holy life, and to distinguish himself as his people. A couple weeks ago, we presented our pastor with a prayer shawl. There is a lot of significance to that. It's a lot of, when a young man turns 13, he gets his first prayer shawl. And that is usually a prayer shawl that is passed down through generation to generation. It's usually the father that will give them their prayer shawl, and it'll be a prayer shawl that his father had been passed down to him. But if the father is not present, it'll be the rabbi of the temple or the tabernacle would have given the young man a prayer shawl. And it's like you're passing a mantle to that young man from the father to the son, or it'd be the rabbi is considered a father figure in the tabernacle. So it would be like the rabbi passes a mantle to that young man, and that would be his covering until he gets married. When he gets married, in most Jewish communities, not all, but most of your Jewish communities, the wife of the groom will present him with a prayer shawl, and that'll be his prayer shawl for the rest of his life. When a Jewish man dies, they will bury him in his prayer shawl. It's an act of honor for that man to be buried in his prayer shawl. There is times that you will see, if you go through history, you'll see that if a man is stripped of his prayer shawl, like they did with Jesus, that's a sign of dishonor to that man. That was what they did to Jesus, is they stripped him of his prayer shawl and his talit, and that was a sign of dishonor to him. A lot of people don't recognize that, but that was, to a Jewish man, that is the ultimate disrespect, for you to strip him of his prayer shawl, which is his prayer life. Because when you're praying, especially because Jesus wore a talit katan, so he always had his talit on all the time, which is what the woman with the issue of blood touched. It was his prayer shawl. It was the tzitzits on his prayer shawl, which is what she touched. But when they stripped him of that was the ultimate sign of disrespect to Jesus, and that was something that the Jewish people recognized. So when they said crucify him, that was an ultimate slap in the face, if you will, that they stripped him of everything. And that's why he felt so alone. But not only that, when he was stripped of that, it was almost as if the presence of God left him, which it did, because God cannot condone sin, and all of the sins of the world fell upon Jesus. So when they took him that, and then the sin of the world fell upon him, God turned his back on Jesus, and that's why he said, my God, why hast thou forsaken me? Even though God didn't forsake him, because was his son, but he could not look upon him, because all the sins of the world, past, present, and future, fell upon Jesus' shoulders at that time. That's why Jesus said, my God, why have you forsaken me? Because he felt so alone in that time. Even though he had the power to call down a legion of angels and pull him off of that cross, he chose to take that for us. And I'll show the significance of the salvation here towards the end. But there's a lot here, so I'm trying not to get too deep here. So we're going to go to Deuteronomy 22 and 12. And that says, thou shalt make the fringes upon the 4 quarters of the vesture. which goes back to what we started with at the beginning. So this is kind of a continuation, because in Numbers, it just says that you are to have fringes on your garment. But Deuteronomy takes it to where you're supposed to have the fringe on all four corners of the garment, not just fringes on the garment itself, but on all four corners. This symbolizes God's authority over the earth, that God's people were scattered to the four corners of the world, and that we completely surrender to God. Now I want to get over into the Tekhelet, or the blue thread. This is where a lot of the meat of what I'm going to teach you is the blue thread. The blue thread, or the Tekhelet. Tekhelet is the Jewish word for the color of the thread. It's like a sky blue. It's a really light blue. If you want to come up after the service, I can show you the color. It's a beautiful color. But it represents heaven, holiness, God's divine authority, and God's presence. In the Jewish community, they look at it as threefold. The color represents the sea. The sea represents the reflection of the sky. And the reflection of the sky makes us look up to see the throne of heaven, the throne of God. And then the throne of God leads our mind towards God's holy throne, reinforcing the duty to follow his commandments. And that's what the spiritual meaning that the Jewish community believes and puts forth for what the Tekhelet represents. And this, back in Numbers, this is actually a command that God gave, is you were to have this blue thread in your tzitzits. And I never knew that until I started doing this study when I was asked to present Pastor Justin with his prayer shawl. I didn't understand the significance of the Tekhelet. I thought it was just something that had recently came into, but this is something that was even from the very beginning, back in Numbers, when Jesus first gave the commandment for the tzitzits, that blue thread was to be there. That blue thread was lost in the 7th century. The Roman government had started putting regulations on the dyes, and finally, as the years went by, the way that the Tekhelet was made and the process for making the Tekhelet was lost, and it was lost for several centuries up until the 20th century was when it was rediscovered. Okay, I lost my place, I'm sorry. The blue was not only used in the Tekhelet color, wasn't used just in the prayer shawl, it was also used in the tabernacle for the coverings, the curtains that was on the tabernacle. They used it there. And you can find that in Exodus 26:1, which says, "Moreover, thou shalt make the tabernacle with 10 curtains of fine twined linen and blue and purple and scarlet." Then it was also used in the ephod that the high priest would wear. It was also used there. That can be found in Exodus 28:31. "And thou shalt make the robe of the ephod olive blue." Now I want to get into the history of the Tekhelet. I kind of touched on this. The reason why the dye was lost was because the Roman government had regulated it. But the dye is considered rare. It was very costly because it was so rare and it was so hard to make. It was difficult to produce, and it was reserved for sacred use, like in the prayer shawl, the tabernacle, priestly garments. That was the only place that dye was supposed to be used for. We'll skip that because it's unnecessary. So when it was rediscovered, there was 2 different rabbis that found. There was one rabbi that had thought that he could make the Tekhelet from a cuttlefish, He found that you could make the dye, but many scholars and rabbis had said that the color was too dark. It was more of what they called a Prussian blue, and they rejected that and said that there's no way that this could be the way that that it was made. So there was a rabbi by the name of Isaac Herzog. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing that correctly. I apologize if I'm not. But he wrote a thesis recommending that the Tekhelet was produced from a snail called the Murex trunculus. But at the time, in 1913, when they excreted the dye from the snail, when they dried it and they processed it, it would always come out purple. It was a dark royal purple. And that was the only way that they could get it. So in 1980, there was a gentleman in Israel by the name of Otto Elsner. He was from the Shimkar College of Fibers in Israel. He discovered that if you take that dye during the processing time, it exposes it to direct sunlight. And this is the only way that it'll work. It has to come in contact to direct sunlight. Tried to synthetically do it with ultraviolet lights and stuff like that, but the only way that they can make it work is if during the time of processing it comes into contact with direct sunlight, it will come out with this beautiful sky blue color. And it comes up, that's how they had come up with this. And then in 1988, which to a lot of people it may be insignificant, but to me I find it significant because in 1988, the year that me, Pastor Justin, Danielle was all born, a rabbi by the name of Eliyahu Tavgar was the first one to actually use this dye that Otto Elsner had created to dye the blue tzitzits again. And then in 1993, a company was formed. It's Patel Tekhelet. They are a nonprofit organization, and even to this day, they are the only company that is sanctioned by Israel, by the Jewish community, to make the Tekhelet. They're the only company that can create this dye, and that's where the Tekhelet dye comes from that they use to make the prayer shawls and the tzitzits today. There is other vendors that can make it, but the Jewish community will only purchase from this organization, the Patil Tekhelet. They are a nonprofit organization. Then we're going to go over to the knots, how the tzitzits are tied. Scripture commands while Scripture commands the fringes, the specific knot patterns were developed through Jewish tradition. The patterns became symbols of faith and covenant. There are two different types of patterns for the tzitzits. There is a third, but it's very rare and it's not used very often. But the two most common ones are the Ashkenazi pattern and the Sephardic pattern. The Ashkenazi pattern is 7, 8, 11, 13. So that's between each of the 5 knots, you have a double knot, then you have 7, a double knot, 8, a double knot, 11, a double knot, 13. Then that's the pattern that they use. Each one of the knots is considered to represent the Torah: Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy. So people don't understand the symbolic of that because people just think, well, this is just something that you do. But there's a pattern to it, and all prayer shawls have one of these two patterns. The Talit, the one that the men wear, what's the name of that again? The katan, the Talit katan uses the Sephardic pattern because it's something that represents the name of God, Yahweh. The Ashkedash pattern, the way that the Ashkedash and why that's most commonly used is they use the 7, 8, and 11, which comes out to 26. 26 in Jewish corresponds to the name of God, Yahweh. And then 13 represents the Echad, or one. So when you add those two numbers together, 26 and 13, it equals 39, which represents the Shema, the Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God is one. 39 represents the Lord is one. And then the Messianic Jewish community take it even a step further, and they see the 39 as healing, because 39 was the number of stripes that Jesus took on his back. So 39 can represent healing. So the Messianic Jewish community see that you put your prayer shawl on, you are putting on a covering of healing. And then the Sephardic pattern is 10, 5, 6, 5. And the Jewish alphabet, 10 represents Yod, 5 is the Hey, 6 is the Vav, and then we go back to 5, which is the name of God, Yahweh, Yod Hey, Vav Hey. That was the representation of the Sephardic. And they don't have the symbolism of the Ashkenazi on the Talit Katan, because it's something that they wear every day. So they use the Sephardic to represent the name of God all the time. I reference the Shema in Deuteronomy 6 and 7, or 6 and 4. We all know what that is, so I'm just going to kind of skip over that. And then at the top of Talit, they call it the Atara. It's in Hebrew, Atara means crown. So it's the crown of the Talit. On the crown of the Talit, it's always adorned very nicely. It always has some sort of pattern. And then it also has an inscription on the top in Hebrew. That inscription is a prayer that is to be said every time you put on your prayer shawl. That prayer, I want to do the Hebrew. I want to try not to mess this up. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kadeshanu b'mitzvotov v'tzivanu lehitataf bet-zitzit. The translation is, Blessed are you, Lord our God, King of the universe, who has sanctified us with his commandments and commanded us to wrap ourselves in the fringes, or tzitzit. The Talit as God's covering. Over time, the Talit became associated with prayer and worship. It became a symbol of God's protection, God's covenant, the reverence before God, and spiritual covering. This can be referenced in Psalms 91 and 4, and it says, He shall cover thee with his feathers, and under his wings shalt thou trust. It also represents covenant. A garment spread over another person often symbolizes a covenant. So in Ruth 3 and 9, we see this. I want to use the King James Version and the ESV on this one because it kind of goes in that a little bit deeper. The King James Version says in Ruth 3 and 9, he asks, Boaz wakes up and he finds Boaz at his feet. And he says, Who are you? And she says, I am Ruth, I am thy maidservant. Spread therefore thy skirt over mine handmaid, for thou art my kinsman. The ESV, because it's a skirt, when we think of a skirt, we think of what a woman would wear. So if you look at the ESV version, it says, Spread your wings over me, over your servant, for you are a redeemer. The wings, when you put on your talit, and you have your talit on, and you spread your arms out, it represents wings. So when it says, so that's why I like the English Standard Version on this a little bit better, because it actually shows what they're referring to. It's not like a skirt like what a woman would wear. She was referring to his prayer shawl. She was saying, cover me with your prayer shawl, for I am your maidservant. You are my redeemer. With Jesus and the fringes, it says, Jesus lived according to the law and wore garments with fringes. One of the most remarkable miracles that is mentioned in Scripture involves the tzitzit. This is the story about the woman with the issue of blood, and this is in Matthew 9:20 through 22. The King James Version says, and behold, a woman which was diseased with an issue of blood 12 years came behind him and touched the hem of his garment. For she said within herself, if I may but touch the garment, I shall be made whole. The ESV takes it a little bit further, and it shows what they were referring here, because a lot of people don't understand what the hem of the garment was. They think, oh, he just touched the hem of his garment, but it was deeper than that. The ESV says, and behold, a woman who had suffered from a discharge of blood for 12 years came up behind him and touched the fringe of his garment. She touched the tzitzits. She didn't physically touch Jesus' garments, because these hang down a little bit further. So that was why she was able to do that, because she didn't physically, because if you touch someone with the issue of blood that's mentioned here, you were considered unclean. So by her touching just the fringe, she didn't touch Jesus himself. So Jesus wasn't unclean. That's what this represents. So a lot of people think, well, she just touched his garments, Jesus was unclean. No, he wasn't. Because this wasn't physically touching Jesus. This is as I mentioned later on here, this is an extremity of the garment. It's an extension of the garment. It's not actually physically touching the person that's wearing it. So a lot of people misunderstand that. Well, they think, well, she touched Jesus. Jesus was unclean at that point. But if you look at it deeper and you go to a different version, like the English Standard Version, it shows you exactly what she touched. This imagery points towards the redemption and the covenant of our relationships. Okay, the wing. As I was going with the healing in his wings, the miracle may connect to a This miracle connects to a messianic prophecy, as we see in Malachi 4:2. I don't have this completely on my paper, so I'm going to go over here and read from here. It says, but unto you that fear my name shall the Son of Righteousness arise with healing in his wings, and ye shall go forth and grow up as calves of the stall. If you'll notice this right here, it's S-U-N, not S-O-N. I didn't notice that until last night. I've never noticed that before. And I had talked to some of the men here in the church and asked them what this meant, because it was confusing to me. This represents Jesus, the Messiah, but it's deeper than that. As I said earlier, the Tekhelet can only be made through direct sunlight. So the sun here, the sun represents light. So it's saying, but unto you that fear my name, the light of righteousness arise with healing in his wings. So God is making you his Tekhelet. I just seen that this morning, because I was like, because even after I talked to the men here, it's like it still didn't really click with me. It's like, I understand this represents Jesus and it represents the Messiah, but why did they use S-U-N instead of S-O-N? Then I was like, wait a minute, the Tekhelet. That's the only way you can make the Tekhelet. You have to have sunlight. So if you have to have Tekhelet to make sunlight, And Jesus, there's healings in the wings. That's what she touched. She touched the tzitzits. That's the only thing. So she touched the wings. She touched the tzitzit of his garment. The only way you can make this blue thread is sunlight. So that was something that was revealed to me just this morning. Because I was like, God, this has to be more significant. There has to be a reason for that. And that was the reason that God showed me. So the word for wings in Hebrew is knaf. And the word knaf has 3 different meanings. It means wings, corners, or the extremities of a garment. So when it's in Malachi chapter 4 here, when it says, with the healing in his wings, that word in Hebrew is knaf. So it's even though it says wings, it can also mean the extremities of a garment, which is referring back to the woman with the issue of blood. She touched the tzitzit, which was an extremity of the garment, which therefore nullified the fact that Jesus was now unclean, because he was not unclean, because it was an extremity, and it was an extension of his garment. Many scholars believe this imagery points to the corners of the master's garment where the fringes were attached. So what is the significance of a talit, or a prayer shawl, for Christians today? It reminds us of God's words. Just as Israel looked at the fringes, believers should keep God's words before them daily. It also represents that we should live a holy life. As seen in 1 Peter. I did not update this. This is not the verse I wanted to use. Braxton, bring up that verse in Matthew. There should be a verse there from Matthew. I think it's Matthew chapter 5. I know that. I believe it's Matthew 5, 17 through 20, I believe it is. I thought I had this in my paper, but I'm not sure what happened there, why it's not. Here it is. I found it. Matthew 5, 17 and 20. It says, think you not that I am come to destroy the law or the prophets, but I am not come. Oh, wait, that's not. Okay. I jumped ahead. Yes, I did. Okay, so we are going to use, it's in Leviticus. I'm thinking about the scripture in Leviticus. I jumped over too far. It's in Leviticus, Braxton. I'm sorry. It says, for I am the Lord your God. Ye shall therefore sanctify yourselves, and ye shall be holy, for I am holy. Well, Peter goes on in 1 Peter chapter 1, verses 15 and 16. And I did not write this down. So 1 Peter chapter 1, verse 15 and 16. But as ye which hath called you is holy, so be ye holy in all manner of conversation, because it is written, be ye holy, for I am holy. But I didn't want to just read that because it says, because it is written. Well, where was it written at? It was written right there in Leviticus. That's where that's referring to. It also reminds us to look to Christ. The Talit points beyond itself and points to Jesus, and it points to Jesus' righteousness, his covering, his redemption, and his healing. Salvation is through Christ alone. This is where I cut this off too. Go to Ephesians chapter 2, 8 and 9, Braxton. For by grace are ye saved through faith, and that not of yourselves, it is the gift of God, not of works, lest any man should boast. So, if it's saying that by grace we are saved, there's nothing that we can do to save ourselves. It's only by God's grace that we're saved. So by wearing the prayer shawl or the talit, you are covering yourself as the representation that you are covering yourself in God's grace. A lot of people just see the talit as just something that you put on when you're praying, and that's fine. I'll be the first to admit that I'm guilty of doing that. I don't wear my prayer shawl or my talit as much as I should, and I apologize to you guys for that. But I always give myself an excuse. So, well, I'm up in the sound booth, I'm up and down. It's hard for me to do that. But there is ways, like I was saying with the Talit Katan, if I really wanted to commit myself, I could go through and get the Katan and I could wear that in church. That way, I can't use the excuse, well, my prayer shawl gets in the way. And I apologize to the congregation for failing in that, because I'm trying to show the significance of the prayer shawl, but yet I'm guilty of not using it in the way that I should. I use it at home, but I don't use it here. And I apologize to the congregation for that once again. It also shows the law and the fulfillment of the law from Christ. This is where we're going to go to Matthew chapter 5 and 17, Braxton. It says, "Think not that I am come to destroy the law or the prophets. I am not come to destroy, but to fulfill. For verily I say unto you, till heaven and earth pass, not one jot or one tittle shall in no wise pass from the law till all be fulfilled. Whosoever therefore shall break one of these least commandments and shall teach men so, he shall be called the least in the kingdom of heaven. But whosoever shall do and teach them, the same shall be called great in the kingdom of heaven. For I say unto you, that except righteousness shall exceed the righteousness of the scribes and Pharisees, ye shall not in no case enter into the kingdom of heaven." Well, why is it that he specifically named the scribes and the Pharisees? The scribes and the Pharisees would give the people, just like what he said here, therefore, any that shall break one of these least commandments and shall teach men so, he shall be called the least in the kingdom. Well, the scribes and the Pharisees weaponized, if you will, the law to where you had to follow in the way that they seemed fit. So they would give people their interpretation of the law. So then you have, it says, but whosoever shall do and teach them, the same shall be called great in the kingdom of heaven. So if you teach people the way God had originally, so that's why he specifically pointed out the scribes and the Pharisees, because they were not following they were following their own laws and giving man their laws instead of giving them God's laws. So that's why he specifically, that's why I believe that's why he's specifically called out the scribes and the Pharisees. And it says that you must exceed their righteousness, because they considered themselves righteous. They considered themselves as they were great in God's eyes. But if you go through and you read the Gospels, Jesus points out several times that they were not righteous, and he would always correct them in a roundabout way. So that's why I believe that's why he had said that we must exceed their righteousness. and there in no case that if you can't exceed their righteousness, that you're not going to enter the kingdom of heaven. So to me, he's specifically saying, it was kind of a jab at the scribes and the Pharisees. He's saying, hey, you're not doing what I told you to do. You're not going to make it into my kingdom. And in a roundabout way, he was at them without specifically saying, hey, you're not going to make it. So in conclusion, the Talit, the Tzitzit, and the Tekhelet are tangible reminders of God's covenant with Israel. Every thread, every knot, and every winding points to obedience, holiness, covenant, worship, and God's presence. The blue thread directs the eyes towards heaven. The fringes remind Israel and us to obey God's commandments. The corners of the garment became a symbol of divine covering and redemption. Ultimately, all of these symbols point to Jesus Christ, the fulfillment of the law, the prominence of the Messiah, and the one in whom we find healing, salvation, covenant, and relationship with God. And that's all I have for this morning.
Thank you for joining us for Maturing the Kingdom. We hope this message with Brother Noah Stines has blessed you this week. We would love for you to join us for one of our services in person. Our address is 201 South Center Street, Hildebrand, North Carolina. Our service times are Sunday 10 a.m., Sunday School, 11 a.m., Worship Service, and Thursday 7 p.m. God bless you, and we hope you will join us again next week for Maturing the Kingdom.